I found that the B2B angle was very compelling because it aligned very much with the way that I saw the world, which was I don't want to convince people to buy our products. I want to make it just so easy that
Mhm.
they're buying already. Like my mom and dad, I've been vegan for 10 years. They still eat steak as often as they get there, as often as they can.
Mhm.
And they know how much this means to me. And so if my parents and my siblings are still eating the way that we ate growing up, I'm realizing consumer habits and changing them is incredibly difficult. But my mom buys the same cake,
Mhm.
for Christmas every year, the same, more or less the same grocery list. And so we could work with the brands that she already buys and that consumers already buy and just, revamp the back end of food production without
Mhm.
compromising the consumer experience. I thought that's how we can make a massive, massive difference in our food system. If we
Mhm.
work in the back end and work with all the world's biggest companies and then scale much, much faster. We have an 8-year target and then an 18-year target as a company. So we have and we have obviously our annual goals. But in 8 years, so in 2030, um, our
Mhm.
our objective is to become the world's largest supplier of egg protein. And that's not like vegan egg company. I think we're probably almost there.
Mhm.
But the world's largest supplier of egg protein on Earth. And then by 2040 is to enable the shutdown of the last factory farm on Earth. And that is our goal as a company.
So today I'm going to be super arrogant and I'm going to tell you that you and all your friends and probably everyone you know is going to be vegan within the next 10 years. But Chris, I love my meat. Here we have a grass-fed beef mama burger from A&W. Mm. 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 I love my meat as well. Let's get into the video.
My co-author and I and our team looked at essentially 10,000 years of disruptive transformations at the societal level. So we looked at sector level and product level, and especially at the societal level with the leading societies of the time. And the conclusion, and I'll double click on some of these insights, is that we're on the cusp of the fastest, deepest, most consequential transformation, not just of any one sector, yes, but also of civilization in that 10,000 year history. In the 2020s, just over the next 10 years, 10, 15 years, we're going to have a convergence that is going to disrupt the 5 foundational sectors of the economy. Information technology, I'll talk about energy, transportation, and food today, and also materials. Now, those are not the only sectors that will be disrupted. Those are the foundational sectors, and everything else depends on those. So everything across society will be disrupted over the next 10 to 15 years. So we need to understand how these disruptions will unfold to be in a better position to serve essentially our society better.
Okay, what is this video, Chris? So, for those of you who don't know, Tony Seba is probably one of the smartest minds today, talking about where our future is going. No one has a crystal ball, but of all the people that could have a crystal ball, he's probably the closest one because he's really smart and understands technology and has been researching for a lot of years where the technology trends are going, right? So if you want to be a good investor, you should really be paying attention not to where things are in the past, but where things are going to be going in the future. So what we've just seen is we have our arc of history over 10,000 years, and the economy goes like this, right? So over time, we have new technologies that come. Back in the Middle Ages, when we went to the Enlightenment phase, we had the printing press, right? And that completely changed society because everyone was then able to say their own thing. The word government, it changed everything because before that, everything was controlled by the church. Everything was controlled by the state. No one was allowed to say and talk about and read new ideas, right? And so then we had the printing press, people became educated, and society progressed. Okay, let's just imagine that you were living in the Middle Ages and you experienced that transition from the Middle Ages to the Enlightenment period, those two periods, what they are colloquially known as at least. Imagine being alive. So your entire understanding of the world was made up almost exclusively of a combination of Christian doctrine and weird superstitions. So from a modern standpoint today, it was like you didn't understand anything. Those people would have, they seem crazy, right? When a plague hits, you'd have no idea why everybody around you is dying. You probably conclude that either the evil spirits are attacking and where God is punishing humanity for some sort of regression, right? So that's how the world worked. Everyone believed crazy shit. And then we had the printing press. The church and the state separated. More people became educated and humanity progressed. So now we're at a similar inflection point where we have all these new exciting technologies. And so Tony predicted the rise of companies like Tesla, who are now taking the world by storm and changing our transportation from gas to electric. And so now we're going to go through the same thing with food.
I usually start my talks with this picture. New York City, Easter Parade, 1900. After horses dominated the transportation industry for thousands of years, I mean, there is one car in this picture. And just 13 years later, there is one horse. So a 10,000-year-old industry got wiped out in about 13 years. And that's how quickly disruptions can happen. In a disruption, just to be clear, is when a new product or service helps to create a new market and also either destroy or diminish the existing industry. And it's usually the experts and the insiders and the mainstream analysts who dismiss disruption. I mean, smart people, some of whom were disruptors in previous lives. But I'm going to ask and answer the question of why this happens.
Maybe it's just me, but does anyone else feel like a lot of people are talking about how the experts are wrong and the mainstream media has some issues? I don't know. I'm just kind of hearing it around. Maybe it's kind of a symptom of this, right? Maybe we're going through some changes. Maybe the people who are currently so stuck in their jobs, maybe they're quite not sure what to do. Maybe things are changing. I don't know. Maybe just a thought.
So how disruption happens? Here's the result of 15 years of work. We usually have an equilibrium, whether it's societal or at the industry level. So at the industry level, for instance, we have had the car for about 100 years, and the value chain hasn't changed much. Elements have. I mean, there's been incredible technology progress, but the architecture has not changed substantially. Same thing with electricity. So we've had the power system for about 100 years. And we have swapped in coal, out nukes, in gas, and so on. But the fundamental architecture has not changed.
I don't know if anyone else has noticed, but I feel like over the past 100 years, most of the things have been the same, right? We bought our cars from Ford and General Motors. We've gotten our electricity from the utility, right? And they provide electricity through the national power grid. Right? Everything, the whole structure of how our economy works has more or less been the same. It hasn't changed at all in the past 100 years.
So we have an equilibrium. Then there is a convergence of technologies. That convergence opens up a new possibility space. And think about 12 years ago when Tesla and other companies came into the EV space and solar companies and so on. So that's when the opportunity space opened up. They come into the market, but here's something interesting. The incumbents, by which I mean the companies that dominate those markets, don't see this new possibility space mainstream analysts don't see that possibility space, but entrepreneurs do. So they come in, and I'll use the Tesla example, about 11 years ago. And over the following few years, they pushed the cost and capabilities until, so they enter the market and they push the capabilities until it ruptures the market. So this has happened already in both energy and transportation.
Shout out to the Tesla investors.
So what does that mean? Rupture means the old rules don't apply anymore. The new rules may or may not be clear, but the old ones clearly don't work anymore. So we're past that rupture point in energy and transportation. And so what we have seen over the last couple of years is the shakeout that happens at that point. So there are accelerators that essentially feed back into the new technologies. And eventually those new technologies get adopted as an S-curve, as I'm going to explain, and they become the new system, and they become the new equilibrium. So I expect that to happen in the 2030s for energy and transport. And at the same time, there is what I call market trauma, which is that the old industry collapses. So that's how disruption happens. So when I look at I'm going to analyze a sector or society, I start with technology cost curves. So you know your computer improves for the same dollar by 100% every 2 years. That's Moore's law. And that's happened for decades and decades and decades. So essentially we know cost curves, which means the improvement in cost and capabilities for a given dollar.
Tony doesn't have a crystal ball. He's just doing the math. What's the cost curve? How fast is the technology getting cheaper? How fast is the new technology getting cheaper? For electric vehicles, how fast are the batteries getting cheaper? For new food systems, how fast is precision fermentation technology getting cheaper? How fast is gene editing getting cheaper? Right? You get the point?
And each technology has a different cost curve. So for data storage, imaging, network capacity, and so on, each technology has a cost curve. So what I do is, and this is from my book, Clean Disruption, in 2014, when you make a good estimate of what the improvement rate is going to be over the next 5, 10, 15 years, and in this case, I assume that it would improve by about 16%. And this is what I drew 7 years ago, the projected cost of lithium-ion batteries out to 2030.
Spoiler alert, we've actually gone a bit faster. It costs about $100 a kilowatt hour already.
And again, the point is not to be 100% accurate, but to analyze the speed and scale of potential disruptions. In this case, as usual, I'm told initially that looked insane. $150 per kilowatt hour by 2021 is not going to happen. I was told that hundreds of times. Guess what? It ended up being a little conservative. It's actually below that. So essentially, it gives us an idea of where the world is going. But single technologies alone do not usually cause disruptions. It's convergence. So if you ask yourself, why did the smartphone, both Apple and Google, happen in 2007? Why not 2005 or 2009? That was the year when the convergence of all the technologies that made a $600 smartphone converged. Computing power, data storage, lithium-ion batteries, etc. That was the year. And that was the year when any of 30 or 40 companies could have built a smartphone. But the companies that dominated the market, Nokia, remember them? Or did not see that disruption happen. But two companies, Google and Apple, who had never built a phone before, were the ones that dominated. So this is textbook disruption. And of course, here's how the adoption went. It was not a straight line because market adoption happens as S-curves, not straight lines. And so back to the car, we saw how the car went from almost nothing to 95% of the US market within 20 years. And this is more than 100 years ago. But the more interesting thing is that the bulk of the disruption, which in this case was from about 11 to 81% penetration, happened in 1 decade, in just 10 years, despite or because building 2 new industries, both auto and oil, building a brand new road infrastructure, fighting World War I, and the meanest pandemic in history. Does that sound familiar? And despite that, the disruption took place essentially in about 10 years. And that's not unusual.
I don't know if it's just me, but I feel like we've just gone through a pandemic. We're fighting a bunch of wars. History seems to kind of be repeating itself a little bit. Maybe it's just me. I don't know. What do you think?
We've seen disruptions happen in 10 to 15 years across the board, from corn to coal to videos. It's uncanny how quickly disruptions can happen. And if anything, adoption S-curves are accelerating. So what used to be multi-decade S-curves are now happening in a year or in a few years. So, and that's because of the speed, the accelerating speed of technology development. And despite all of this evidence, despite hundreds of years of evidence, we still get the conventional forecasts wrong every single year. So this is the IEA. Every year they make a straight line projection to the future, and this is for solar PV. And every year since 2000, they've been wrong by about 30%. Every year they've been wrong by about 30%, right? And every year they draw another straight line based on just an extrapolation of the surface properties of what's happening today. But if you look at reality, look at that green curve, that's starting to look like an S-curve. So the reality is the adoption S-curve. But the collapse is also an inverted S-curve. And in this case, I'm showing the projections from the US Energy Information Agency. Every year they draw a straight line for coal, and coal has been, since it peaked, essentially going down a classic inverted S-curve of collapse. But every year, even this year, the EIA says, nope, this year it's going to go flat forever for the next 20, 30 years. And it never happens because of linear projections. So here's the question. Why do smart people at smart organizations consistently fail to anticipate or lead disruptions? And it has to do with what I said before, right? When a big opportunity space opens up, they just don't see it because they're looking through a straw. It's a linear mindset. They see the world like this, when in fact, in times of disruption, adoptions are S-curves. And one of the big mistakes that they make is the idea of what I call the faster horse syndrome, which is that folks thought that cars were a faster horse. And so it was a one-to-one substitution. We know that was not the case. But usually folks, smart people indeed think in this way.
I'm not going to get into all of the other details in this presentation. If you're interested, links in the corner or down below, please watch it. If you're an investor, you need to be looking at the presentation because it's going to affect how you invest in any company. And so I'm not telling you go out and buy these cultivated food stocks. I'm not telling you go out and buy I'm not going to tell you what to do, but what I am going to tell you to do is go and look at this presentation and just think about it, right? How are the S-curves working? Where are the technology trends going? Industries are collapsing and other industries are coming up. It's a really good time to be an investor, and it's a really good time to lose a lot of money if you're doing the wrong thing. Okay, so make sure you actually think about it. Now let's get on to food.
So let me talk about the disruption of food and agriculture. And I'll go, so I'll start with insulin, which in the 1970s used to be extracted from animals.
So we took the insulin hormone market away from pigs, and now we're taking the pepsin protein market away from pigs. I believe. I can't remember what the company was that I had in my video yesterday, and the video before that. Check them out.
And you needed about 23,000 animals to get a pound of insulin. I mean, it was animal extraction, essentially. In the 1980s, Big Pharma developed insulin, human insulin, that was brewed from yeast, essentially, like a beer fermentation process.
I feel like I've talked about this technology before. I don't know.
This is what I call precision fermentation. So essentially, they modified a microorganism to produce this protein, insulin. And as you see, even though it's healthcare, it disrupted the industry in about 13 years. It disrupted this animal insulin market. That is precision fermentation. So beer fermentation, we know, grain plus water, essentially in energy. We have brewer's yeast, and we get beer. Precision fermentation is the same, idea of fermentation, except that we program the microorganism, the yeast or the bacterium, to produce any protein that we want. And this is what I call precision biology, is the convergence. Biotech from an information technology. That's the convergence that, for instance, gave us the vaccines recently. And the cost curve of biotech is insane. I mean, it makes Moore's law look positively linear. So biotech is going exponentially faster than Moore's law.
Shout out to the people who got the BioNTech COVID vaccine or any of the other ones. I did. Yeah, it took about a year to develop, which is incredible versus the normal 5 to 10 year lead time that it takes for a vaccination. This is the technology disruption at work. Did you get the vaccine, or are you too scared because of what you've seen in the mainstream media?
So the disruption of milk, I'm going to cover, and meat is going to be right behind it. So all you need is 3% of solid proteins. Milk is 3% solid proteins. All you need is to disrupt that 3% to disrupt the dairy industry. You don't need to disrupt the water. All you need to do is disrupt that. And this is a business-to-business ingredient disruption, because a third of the revenues of the dairy industry come from selling ingredients to essentially as commodity ingredients, which are bought, of course, on cost. Protein shakes, protein bars, and so on.
Can someone please tell me what company I've been talking about for the last couple videos? Who is disrupting the protein industry? I just wish I knew.
So if you disrupt this, right, just the protein shake and protein bar market, essentially the dairy industry goes into a financial tailspin. And we know that S-curves happen quickly. Citric acid, insulin, rennet, and so on. Because again, you don't need consumer behavior change. Precision fermentation proteins, the cost is improving by about 100 times per decade, 100 times. So the rupture point, the cost parity is going to come around 2024 or 5. And by 2030, the cost of PF proteins, which again are brewed locally, will be about 80% lower, 5x lower than animal proteins. So we expect the dairy industry to be pretty much bankrupt by 2030.
I'm going to be here on YouTube talking about this for as long as I need to try and educate people and to try and help people for whoever is interested.
And a new business model is what I call food as software, which is, again, because biotech and infotech have converged, you can design proteins just like you design applications or videos. And it's a phase change to a new food system. See, the pattern repeats. And the possibilities are endless, even though the mainstream doesn't see it. We can see infinite numbers of proteins. This is not an exaggeration. We actually did the numbers. There are millions of proteins in nature, but we get most of our proteins from just 12 plants and 5 animals.
Take 1 minute, maybe pause this video, I don't know. Just think about, what do you eat every day? What is in your kitchen cabinets? Let's just say I'm a normal person who's not vegan, and maybe I wake up in the morning, I will have some yogurt, and I'll have some cereal. Okay, so what are the bases of those two food groups? We have a cow and we have corn. Then for lunch, I'll have some eggs and maybe a few vegetables. Okay, so we have chicken. Then for dinner, I'm going to eat chicken. Maybe I'll have a chicken burrito, corn tortillas, chicken, have some corn salsa in there, have some sour cream from a cow. There's not that many food groups that we're eating here, guys. Like, it's pretty limited.
Which makes exactly no sense. And with PF, we can make human proteins, which you can't do with livestock, of course. Collagen, milk proteins, and so on and so forth. So again, we expect the dairy industry to be bankrupt by 2030, and livestock meat will follow the same idea, both with PF and with the later technology, which is cell agriculture. And this is, I mean, precision fermentation is 10 to 100x more resource efficient. It's 100 times more land efficient than the cow. 40% of the land in America is used by livestock, 40%. And again, all you need, I mean, is 2% of this is a composition disruption. The Impossible Burger, to replicate the aroma and the smell and the taste and so on of the cow, only needs 2% composition of their proprietary heme protein. Just 2%. You can disrupt the market very quickly. And there are hundreds of companies today going after eggs, pork, fish, and so on. So all animal extraction food essentially is on the block for disruption. So we expect that by 2030, the market's going to reduce the need for cows by 50% and 90% by 2035. We have never seen this quick disruption of the food industry. I mean, some of the implications are pretty astonishing. For instance, because so much of America, I mean, almost half, like I said, 40% of the landmass of the country is used for livestock, freeing up all of this land because of the PF disruption will free up a landmass the size of the Louisiana Purchase. Free. So there are negative implications, of course. Farmland values are going to crash.
Shout out to everyone who's pissed off at Bill Gates because he's buying all the farmland.
And so on. But for the first time in history, we'll have this possibility space open up. If we put together the three disruptions, there are dramatic implications. And so into the 2030s, because the cost of all of these foundational sectors are going down, as I showed, dramatically by up to 10x over the next 15 years, 10 to 15 years, the cost of the American dream, quote unquote, in terms of what we consume for energy, transport, food, and so on, will be about $250 a month. $250 a month. So this will change everything. This will give us an opportunity to end poverty, inequality, environmental degradation, and so on. And this we can make happen in the 2030s. But in the 2020s, our system is out of equilibrium. So we're going to see increasing instability over the, I mean, you haven't seen anything yet. The pandemic is just the beginning. So because we're going to have both, for the first time in history, 5 foundational sectors being disrupted, and also the breakthrough of the 5 new at the same time. We've never seen that before. So we expect massive instability, narrowing buffers, and increasing fragility of our system. So the shocks are going to feed into one another. None of this is linear. Shocks are going to feed into one another. Now,
I'm going to stop it there because it's already been about half an hour in this video. If you still haven't figured out why everyone's going to be vegan in the next 10 years, I don't know what to do. Look at the cost curves. I really hope this has been helpful for you. Please, highly recommend you watch the entire interview from Tony Seba. Links in the description. I'm Chris. Thank you for watching. Have a great day.